I just couldn't. I was just wonderful news for my dear friend Jimmy and his amazing staff. They continue the show. That's right. You know, I'm so happy for them. Plus, now that Jimmy's not being canceled.
What made that moment stand out was not just the punchline itself. The real impact came from how perfectly it landed at that exact point in time. For weeks, people had been surrounded by nonstop rumors, constant speculation, and headline after headline, suggesting that late-night television was facing challenges unlike anything it had experienced before. Every show that ended, every contract dispute, and every decision made by television executives quickly became part of a much larger political conversation. Instead of being viewed as ordinary business moves, many people began interpreting every development through a political lens, making the atmosphere around late-night television feel more intense than ever.
I get to enjoy this again. Yeah. I was stressed. Once more, I am the only martyr in late night.
That is why, when Stephen Colbert shared his message about Jimmy Kimmel staying on the air, viewers immediately sensed there was more behind his words than a simple congratulations. On the surface, it sounded like one comedian celebrating another, but underneath the humor was a reminder that many people throughout late-night television had spent months wondering whose show might be next. The audience responded with loud applause, because they understood exactly what Colbert was hinting at. The moment was never just about Jimmy Kimmel. It reflected an entire entertainment industry that had unexpectedly found itself caught in ongoing political debates. Colbert then lightened the mood by joking about being the only martyr left in late-night television, smoothly guiding the room back into laughter. Even that line carried extra weight because many in the audience recognized it as a playful reference to the growing belief that comedians and talk show hosts were receiving heightened criticism after speaking about powerful political figures. Whether people agreed with that perspective or rejected it, the topic had already become a major part of the national conversation. Then Colbert delivered one final line by joking that everything was fine unless CBS had something to announce. The audience erupted once again because the joke touched on a reality many viewers had already been thinking about. Television companies across the industry were making difficult financial decisions. Budgets were shrinking, ratings remained under pressure, and shows continued facing uncertain futures. Whenever another announcement appeared, people were quick to wonder whether politics had played any role in the decision. In just a few words, Colbert managed to capture that feeling of uncertainty, which is exactly why the moment stayed with so many people. He never launched into a long political speech or delivered an emotional lecture. Instead, he relied on comedy to express what many people in the room were already thinking. For supporters of late-night television, the exchange also felt like a show of solidarity, with comedians standing beside one another during a period that many believed had become increasingly difficult.
Do you ever think the President of the United States would be celebrating your unemployment?
I mean, that son of a bitch, you know, is really unbelievable.
Mr. Son of a bitch.
I mean,
Mr. Son of a bitch.
His loyal.
When a late-night monologue opens with that kind of genuine emotion, it begins to feel like much more than ordinary entertainment. It starts sounding like a reflection of a conversation taking place across the entire country. Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert are not simply telling jokes. Through their comedy, they are expressing concerns and emotions that many Americans recognize. The suggestion that a president appeared to celebrate people losing their jobs strikes a deeply personal nerve, especially for viewers who remember the uncertainty, financial pressure, and anxiety that unemployment brought to countless families. Inside the studio, laughter filled the room, yet there was also an unmistakable sense of uneasiness. That combination created a memorable moment where comedy and real life blended together in a way that made the jokes feel far more meaningful.
I've been doing similar work over the past 8 years, observing Donald Trump. No offense to the chimpanzees, but... And after a while, I don't know how long exactly, but Dr. Goodall spent most of her time watching them from a distance, began to interact with her fellow primates, and last night, that happened to me.
Kimmel then added another memorable line by joking that he had finally started interacting with the other primates, and somehow the same thing happened again the previous night. Although the audience laughed immediately, the remark carried another layer beneath the humor. By comparing his years of watching Donald Trump to the work of a researcher carefully observing behavior over time, Kimmel suggested that the former president had become one of the most closely watched, analyzed, and discussed public figures in modern politics. The joke worked because it combined playful satire with a familiar image that audiences had come to recognize after years of following the same public debates.
When Donald Trump gave a crowd in Indiana, Pennsylvania, yet another review of my performance at the Academy Awards.
That blend of sharp comedy and long-running public familiarity is one of the reasons late-night television continues to shape political discussions across the United States. If you enjoy following stories like this and appreciate clear, straightforward analysis, consider subscribing to the channel for more updates. Not everyone viewed the situation the same way, however. Some critics argued that comedians were exaggerating routine business decisions and turning ordinary television industry changes into political controversies. Yet regardless of which side people supported, one thing became increasingly clear. The conversation had expanded far beyond ratings, contracts, or network decisions. It had evolved into a much broader debate about criticism, public influence, and whether political leaders should openly celebrate the professional struggles of media personalities who regularly challenge them. As long as those questions continue to spark disagreement, moments like this are likely to remain part of the public conversation. Sometimes the biggest impact does not come from a dramatic accusation or a stunning revelation. Sometimes it comes from a comedian delivering a joke that makes everyone realize there is a much deeper message hidden beneath the laughter. Keep following the channel for more stories that people across the country are talking about. As clips from the exchange spread online, Donald Trump responded quickly through social media. In his post, he strongly criticized Jimmy Kimmel, described the Oscars host in highly negative terms, and argued that the broadcast was politically biased and unfair. The response, filled with personal criticism and calls for change, shifted attention away from Kimmel's original remarks and toward a wider debate about the entertainment industry, reflecting Trump's long-established pattern of responding directly and publicly to critics.
Well, thank you, President Trump. Thank you for watching. I'm surprised you're still... Isn't it past your jail time?
I've watched some of the people that host. Jimmy Kimmel was horrible. Some of these people, if I can't beat out Jimmy Kimmel in terms of talent, then I don't think I should be.
What started as what seemed like an ordinary Donald Trump social media update quickly turned into a week packed with political headlines, late-night comedy, and growing debate over America's involvement in the Middle East. As the days unfolded, Trump released a series of major statements about Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and the rising tensions across the region. He announced what he described as important victories, issued fresh warnings, set public deadlines, and spoke about the possibility of significant military action. Yet almost every major announcement was soon followed by conflicting reports, unexpected developments, or new information that made the situation far less clear than it first appeared. That widening gap between Trump's confident statements and the events that unfolded afterward became the central focus of both Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, who dedicated large portions of their monologues to examining, questioning, and joking about the administration's messaging. Kimmel began by highlighting one of Trump's most talked about social media posts, in which Trump accused Iran of violating a ceasefire by firing into the Strait of Hormuz. He then dramatically raised the stakes by warning that if Iran refused to meet American demands, the United States could target major infrastructure such as bridges and power plants. For Kimmel, the striking part was not only the warning itself, but also the contrast it created with Trump's long-promoted image as someone who prides himself on making deals. One moment he presented himself as a leader pursuing peace and stability, while the next he was speaking in terms of overwhelming military force. Kimmel joked that Trump had transformed from Mr. Nice Guy into someone far more intimidating almost overnight. The audience laughed because the joke reflected a pattern that critics have pointed out for years. Trump's public messaging often shifts rapidly between diplomacy and confrontation. One day, the emphasis is on negotiations and peaceful solutions, while the next, the language turns toward threats of force. That unpredictability became one of the defining themes throughout the week's coverage. Kimmel argued that presidential statements carry enormous weight and should be delivered with careful consideration. What made the post especially unusual, in his view, was how casual it sounded. Instead of reading like a carefully prepared presidential announcement, it came across more like an emotional social media post written in the heat of the moment. That contrast became a major source of comedy because the relaxed tone seemed completely out of place given the seriousness of the international situation. While Kimmel focused on Trump's choice of words and style, Stephen Colbert shifted attention toward another announcement that quickly attracted scrutiny. Trump declared what appeared to be a major diplomatic success, saying Iran had agreed never to close the Strait of Hormuz again. At first, the statement sounded like a significant breakthrough because the waterway is one of the world's most important shipping routes, and any agreement involving it would have major international consequences. But according to Colbert, that confidence faded almost immediately as reports began suggesting Iran had not fully committed to the agreement in the way Trump described. Suddenly, what had looked like a major diplomatic achievement appeared far less certain. Colbert built an entire segment around how quickly the narrative changed, joking that the celebration became outdated almost as soon as it was announced. The humor came from watching the story reverse directions so quickly. One day brought confidence and celebration, while the next brought confusion and uncertainty. That repeating cycle became one of the biggest themes of the week. Trump would announce another breakthrough, fresh information would emerge, and the story would shift once again. To Colbert, the entire sequence felt less like a carefully planned political strategy, and more like a sitcom where every solution immediately creates another unexpected problem before the previous storyline has even finished.
See yourself in him at all? A former reality TV star?
No, I'd like to see him do well. He's a character. I don't know him. I assume he probably supports me. Does he support me?
I
I think so, yeah. I heard he does. I heard he's a big MAGA person. He's doing well. I don't know. If you have a rigged vote out there, that's the problem. The votes are rigged. If we had Jesus Christ come down and count the votes, I would have won California because I do great with this.
Jimmy Kimmel returned to that same theme while discussing another Trump speech focused on economic conditions and international developments. During his remarks, Trump declared that the Strait of Hormuz was open once again. Oil shipments were moving normally, and business activity was returning to normal. His message projected confidence and gave the impression that the crisis was moving towards a successful conclusion. However, before long, new complications emerged. Reports indicated that Iranian officials disputed parts of Trump's description and challenged the suggestion that the situation had been completely resolved. Once again, what initially sounded like a victory suddenly appeared much less certain. Rather than spending most of his time arguing over who was correct, Kimmel focused on the repeating pattern itself. First came a major announcement, then public celebration, followed by contradictory information, and before long, the same cycle repeated itself. It became increasingly difficult to ignore. Every declaration of certainty seemed to be followed by fresh uncertainty, and every claimed breakthrough was soon met with another complication. For late-night comedians, that pattern provided an endless stream of material. For many viewers, though, it created growing confusion, as the headlines seemed to change almost every single day. It became harder to know which version of events reflected the most accurate picture. While Kimmel concentrated on those recurring contradictions, Colbert focused on another aspect of the story, the passing of time without a clear resolution. Another week had gone by, peace negotiations remained uncertain, deadlines continued approaching, warnings kept being issued, yet no final outcome appeared any closer.
Colbert turned that uncertainty into a series of jokes about experts and political analysts who constantly tried to predict what would happen next, but never seemed able to stay ahead of events. The audience laughed because the situation felt increasingly familiar. Every week introduced another deadline, another warning, and another promise that clarity was just around the corner. Yet the overall situation remained largely unresolved. The repetition itself became the joke. Every new announcement sounded historic, every deadline appeared urgent, yet the broader picture changed very little. The story then shifted to another of Trump's dramatic social media posts. Colbert highlighted an Easter morning message in which Trump referred to what he called Power Plant Day and Bridge Day in Iran. The post warned of serious consequences and suggested military action could be approaching. Colbert joked that the wording sounded less like an official presidential statement and more like advertising for a big-budget action movie. Instead of the measured language people often expect during national security situations, the message felt highly theatrical and designed to capture attention. The audience laughed because the post appeared written to create maximum impact. Colbert joked that it sounded as though Trump was promoting the premiere of a blockbuster film rather than addressing an international crisis. Another moment that drew laughter came from the idea that television networks might actually need to edit parts of a sitting president's remarks before broadcasting them. Usually, comedians are the ones pushing the limits of television, but this time Colbert suggested network executives were left deciding how much presidential rhetoric could safely air without changes. The humor grew even stronger when the message suddenly shifted tone. After issuing warnings and speaking about serious consequences, Trump quickly switched to language filled with praise, optimism, and blessings. That dramatic change created one of the biggest laughs of the entire segment. One moment the post sounded severe, and the next it became unexpectedly uplifting. Colbert used that sudden shift to highlight how unpredictable modern political communication can sometimes appear. More importantly, the segment pointed toward a broader reality. Every statement made by a major political figure is immediately analyzed, clipped, shared across social media, and turned into content within minutes. When those statements become especially dramatic, comedians often do not need to exaggerate them, because simply repeating the words can already sound humorous. The story then moved to another unusual announcement when Trump posted nothing more than a date and time, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Without any explanation, widespread speculation immediately followed. People wondered whether the announcement involved diplomacy, sanctions, military action, negotiations, or something entirely different. Colbert had fun imagining every possible scenario, joking that viewers could not tell whether Trump was preparing to reveal a major geopolitical decision or simply promoting a television event. The comedy came from the uncertainty because nobody knew exactly what the message was supposed to mean. That confusion reflected a much larger pattern throughout the week's events. Major declarations often appeared before detailed explanations. Important deadlines arrived before clear strategies, and new announcements regularly created more questions than answers. As the week continued, the bigger discussion became less about any individual statement and more about the overall communication strategy. Critics argued that Trump's messaging often made complicated international situations seem fully resolved before all the facts were clear. Supporters responded that strong leadership sometimes requires projecting confidence while negotiations remain ongoing. Throughout their monologues, both Kimmel and Colbert clearly focused on the critic's perspective, repeatedly highlighting the distance between confident public statements and later developments. Their comedy was not aimed at one isolated remark, but at the recurring cycle of bold declarations, followed by corrections, complications, or changing circumstances. By the end of the week, the broader conflict itself remained unresolved. Iran continued to be at the center of international attention. Questions surrounding the Strait of Hormuz remained unanswered, and diplomatic tensions continued. Yet public discussion had increasingly shifted toward the messaging surrounding those events. For Kimmel and Colbert, that communication style had become the real story. They argued that the repeated cycle of announcements, celebrations, contradictions, and revisions made it increasingly difficult for ordinary Americans to understand exactly what was happening. In the end, the week illustrated how modern politics and entertainment now unfold side by side. Major international events develop in real time across social media. Presidential statements become comedy material within hours, and global conflicts fuel both serious political debate and late-night monologues. As long as dramatic announcements continue colliding with changing developments, comedians like Kimmel and Colbert will probably never run out of fresh material, because in their view, the hardest part is no longer writing the jokes. It is simply keeping pace with a story that seems to change almost every day.